So now we're going to talk about piecing your blocks together. So we're at the sewing machine, but just to go over, recap a bit about your pattern. You've got all your shapes cut out. Lay your block out the way you want it to look. And I've got it on my little felt cover that's on my workboard. So when we start piecing together, we're going to start joining our triangles first up. And we'll stitch them together, then we'll join these two units together, the rectangles, then we'll make the row, so we'll make 3 separate rows, and then we'll join the rows together. But we're going to go through getting your quarter accurate seam, your 1/4 inch seam, we'll go through pressing properly, and then we'll go through pinning, and we'll make up this block. But to start with, I'm going to put the sew slip mat on my bed of my machine because this will help me feed everything through nicely. So we're going to take the brown paper off the back. We'll keep that to put back on later on. Now you've got 2 ways you can put this on. You can put it on like such, and this cutout here is going to expose your feed dogs. Just make sure you press it down because you want it to adhere to your bed of your machine. You could, if you want to, if you don't want to let it hang over the side like I like to do, you could put it on this way. But your feed dogs can get a little bit caught on that, so I prefer to put it this way. Put it on there. Like, this is the awl that I was talking about before. I love to use this tool because it helps me pull my threads up. It's going to help me feed through my pieces. It helps me out a lot at the sewing machine. So it always sits very close to my sewing machine. Put your mat on, press it down so that it's really stuck there nicely so it doesn't move. I'm going to tuck the end in under. Now we're ready to sew. I have got my 1/4 inch foot on and my needle is in the center position where it automatically defaults to, but I need to check that from that needle point to the side of this foot measures exactly 1/4 inch. So I'm going to use my little ruler that I talked about before. I'm going to put the edge of the ruler right against the edge of the foot. Drop your foot down. Make sure the edge of the ruler is lined up exactly with the edge of the foot. Just going to move it down a little bit here. Just make sure it's lined up, that there's no little ridges there. Then we want to put our needle in the down position. I'm just hand winding the needle down. And I need to know that the needle's sitting right on that 1/4 inch mark that's on the ruler. You can see that line there. The edge of the foot's lined up right on the edge. The foot's on the edge of the ruler. The needle's right on the 1/4 inch. So now I know I'm going to take the exact 1/4 inch that's allowed on my templates. So we'll just wind the needle back and take this out. So now I use a starter piece. This is just a nice little thing, just a scrap of fabric, but I find the 1/4 inch foot doesn't really cover the feed dogs. And when we start right on the edge of something, the fabric can get gobbled up down into this hole where the needle works. So starting with a little starter piece will stop that from happening. So just start sewing. And then we're going to pick up 2 of our triangles. We're going to put one on top of the other. Now you can see quite clearly how all of these edges are lining. So we can see this edge is aligning and this edge is aligning. If one of the fabrics laid outside the other, you'd know you've cut out something wrong. And that's why I love to put these little dull points on our templates, because it can align everything up perfectly for me. So we're going to put this under the needle. Now I've got a little bit of the white hanging out and I know it's hard for you to see that there, so I'm just going to use the awl to tuck that back in under. The side of the foot is exactly on the edge of the fabric. I'm just going to use the awl because this helps me get started. And this just all stays in my hand because as I come through, if I've got to adjust something, I can adjust with this awl. And I'm not pinning at this stage, as you can see. I'm just feeding that right through. So stop there. Then you can pick up the next piece, align them up. And if you don't know, what we're doing now is we're actually chain piecing. And it just saves cutting threads and starting off at the end of every piece. Just chain piece through. I've got the green hanging out a bit, so I'm going to tuck it back under, pull the white down, and I'm going to hold it with the awl. And I'll just keep chain piecing all my pieces through so I've got all the pieces joined. We'll pick up a couple of rectangles and join them in now. So line the ends up, put it under the foot, let the awl help you get started. Line up the ends, hold the awl at the end and it'll keep your fabrics aligned. So there we have some units joined and they're all joined together and we've got our starter piece at the end. Now I'll just find my little scissors. Now when we cut our threads we don't want to cut them right back level because it can unravel, so leave yourself a little bit of a tail. Cut in between. There's our starter piece. Keep it under the foot ready for the next piece when we do a bit more stitching. It's there ready to go. So now we're going to press. So we're going to just close our board up. Got my little iron here. So now I'm going to just press the stitching line. I like to set my threads because I find a lot of threads can stretch. So I just press both sides first, then I open it out and I put the light colour down on the ironing surface and I gently press along that seam. Now the little mini iron is really good because it's not distorting the outside edges. It's keeping it nice and even for me. And I get plenty of heat in there. So that's what our seam will look like when we press it. So we'll go through and press all of these. Press both sides. Press back to the dark. Just along that stitching line. It's very simple to do. I don't use steam. A lot of people like to use steam, but I don't. I just use a dry iron. Press back to the dark. So now we're ready to open our board out again. And we already have these pieces sewn together just to save time. So now we're going to join the row. So we'll start up here. We're going to pick one up and join. Now you might like to pin. You might be a person that likes to pin. I'm not necessarily a pinning person, but that's purely is my choice. But if you prefer to pin, you would pop a pin here and here. You've got to be careful that this seam doesn't flip back the other way. So that's where the awl comes in handy again. As I stitch down, I can be sure and I can hold that seam facing the right way so it doesn't flip over, and I just remove the awl as I get to it. I can use the awl here to hold these pieces together. And just keep the awl. That'll stop that seam from flipping over again. And there we have our first bit done. So now we can join the next piece on, which is going to be this one. And now this is terribly important. You can see now that from the tip of this point to the outside edge I have exactly a 1/4 inch seam. And that's because my template's accurate. It's because I've got my needle set to the right 1/4 inch and it's exactly lining up with this ruler. So my block is going to turn out the exact size that it should, which is terribly important. It's very rewarding when you spend all the time cutting everything out and it doesn't come together accurately. When it comes together accurately, you feel very chuffed about it. So once again, use the awl to help you feed that through. Watch that seam underneath, that it's going to go the right way and doesn't flip backwards, because seams that flip backwards can cause you a lot of problems when you start to do the quilting. So there we have that one done. So now we'll join the next row, which is rectangle to square. Now see, you can see here where it's messy, I haven't pressed that properly, so I need to go back and press that seam so it sits nice and flat. Flip it over, press from this side. And that can happen when you rush to do things. Seam down this side. Them all lined up so everything's nice and neat. And it is worth taking your time. Don't rush to do these things, particularly if you're a beginner. So see how one bit's just a little bit longer than the other? You never know why those things happen. It could be stretching with ironing, could be a bit of miscutting, but I tuck that little bit of orange up underneath and I use the awl to hold it in place as I sew down. And we want you to be proud of the blocks that you make up. We want you to get them accurate first time around so that you can just keep ploughing through these blocks and make them all up and start the quilting. And once we join this block up, we're going to be doing some quilting, so it's very exciting. Tuck this big back up underneath, hold with the awl. So you can see how handy the awl is. It saves me all the time that I would normally take with pinning. It helps me. So there's our second block done, or second row. So now we're going to press these seams, and we want to have a look at this block so that we can work the seam which way we're going to press. Now a little tip, and I don't know whether you can see this, I've stitched down here when I joined the triangles together, and then we've stitched up here to join the two units together. So what we've created is we've created a cross with the stitching lines. Now where those two lines of thread meet, that's exactly your 1/4 inch point. Now the reason I'm showing this, if I press the seam this way, you cannot see where those two threads intersect, so you don't know where your point is. So in that case, these two seams are going to be pressed into the centre, into the rectangles. That way I'm going to expose that X mark. So when I start to join these blocks together, I know exactly where my 1/4 inch point is. So these, the top and bottom row, are going to be pressed in. Now we want the seams to butt up against each other, so I don't want these seams pressed in because it would be too much bulk. These seams will get pressed out. So this seam's in, this one out, this one in, and then all the seams will butt up against each other. So we're just going to shift these and once again fold this up, and I'm going to press these seams. So I'll set the stitching line first. We want to press the seams in, so we just press back. Just gently press back against that seam. Same this side. Turn it over and just press back against it. So you don't want to have any little ridges in here. You don't want to have any little folds. You want it a nice, crisp, open seam that's pressed the right way. And you've got your perfect 1/4 inch points. These ones are going out. So we'll set the seam first. And we'll press the seams going out. This one going out. So you can see now how those seams are going in, out. So now we're going to pick them up And we do need to now connect these two seams, and I hope you can see that really closely. We want those to lock right in against each other. And this is where the fork pins come into their own. This double pin, my favourite pins, and they're the only pins I basically use besides the flower head pin ones that I used when I was cutting the fabric. Now the idea of this pin is it's going to go either side of the seam. I find if I put one pin up that seam, the thickness of the pin can push my seams away from each other. And if I put a pin either side, I can still also distort that those seams connecting together. Now this is a very flexible pin, so you can flex it in. If you want to go really close to the stitching line, you can, but go in either side of the seam. And you're only going to take a tiny little bit of the fabric. I call that a bite. Only take a small bite. You can even, once you nest that together, you can even put the pin down here further, so it's not going to be in the road. Take a little bite, connect this one together perfectly, take another pin, take a little bite, and then it's all joined together. Now you can pin the ends if you would prefer to, but I'm going to use the awl. Oops, get the thread through here. And then we'll use our little starter piece. Align the ends so they're aligned right level with each other. You don't want to start or finish with one piece of fabric shorter than the other. You want to have them all lined up so the ends are exactly level. Come through. You can see how I'm using the awl. And you notice the pins are sitting inside the block. They're not facing out onto this side, because I find if they're facing in, I can pull them out as I get close to them. So as I get close, and if you have a needle down position on your machine, use that, because you want the needle to stay down when you get close to that pin. Just come across. You get close to that pin. Now I could keep sewing because that pin is not up underneath my needle, so I can leave it there. I'm going to line up the ends, hold with the awl. And that's how we continue to put our rows together. And we'll have a peek and let's see if we've got all of our points matching. It's like unveiling a secret, isn't it, looking at this? And there we go. We've got perfect points joining together. We've got our perfect 1/4 inch point here at the side on all of our points. So now we're getting a perfect block. So when we press this seam, once again, we've got these two lines of stitching intersecting, so we want to expose that X mark, which means we're going to press into the middle. We're not going to press this way because you don't see that X mark. I always say X marks the spot, so you do want to see that all the time. Shift my pins. I'll press this seam. Then we're going to press to the middle, and then we'll join the other row on, and then we'll have a perfect block. So just go step by step, take those little few tips that I've given you there, work with those, and you'll end up with all your blocks being absolutely perfect. So as you can see there, everything's coming together beautifully. So once we finish sewing this row on, which we're not going to do just now, but I would be sewing that next row on, which I've got laid out here in my little layout sheet. I'll be joining these to these, and then I'll be joining that row on. And then I just go through and make up all my blocks. Then we're going to get ready to quilt those blocks, and we'll show you that very soon as we get this sewn together. Now we've got our block finished, and this is a different block, but it's just to show you different colourways. We want you to experiment with all different colours. But it's all finished, it's all pressed neatly, and do make sure you've got your back of your block looking really, really neat, because it makes such a difference when you're quilting. We've now also cut out our batting. This is the double-sided fusible batting that we love to use, the Hobbs heirloom one. We've got our backing cut out, and then we've cut these just a little bit bigger than the block. And if they're not all equal in that, it doesn't matter, because it will take in a little bit with quilting. So put the 3 layers out on your ironing surface. Just layer them all up, and then with your hot dry iron, start from the middle and press. Now, using this batting, it means I don't have to do any pinning. You can notice I'm putting the iron on this batting. It's not sticking to the iron, it's not making a mess, so it's very, very lovely to use. Love it. It saves me so much extra work and time. And you can see how beautifully flat that's making that block. It's going to make it so easy to quilt. Now we're going to turn it over. Just flatten your backing out and press the back. Now if you're going to iron fast, don't expect it to stick. We need to move our iron very slowly, so we're pressing. We're not ironing, because it's the heat that's making the adhesive stick to the fabric. If I move the iron too fast, it's not going to adhere. It'll just pull off. So just keep pressing nice and slowly till you get the whole lot done. Then we're ready to go to our machine and start the quilting. And see, having your little workstation set up right alongside your machine, how easy it is. Now just check the front again that everything's fine. We're ready to go. So now you choose what fabric what threads you want to use to quilt this with. I've got a normal white thread on the machine, but on the actual quilts that we've made, I've chosen to use the mono poly thread in the top and the bobbin. I'm going to quilt with the white thread in the top and the bobbin, just so I can show you what happens if I use a regular thread, and then I'll show you the back of the quilt we've finished, and we'll get up close to that so you can see what the difference is between using the mono poly clear thread to using a normal thread. Now at the machine, I've still got my 1/4 inch foot on. I'm going to take that off, and I'm now going to put my open toe foot on. So this is the foot that I recommend we use for doing this sort of quilting, because we're going to stitch in the ditch and we're going to do some outline quilting. So this is a foot that has nothing in the front, which means I'm going to be able to see the ditch perfectly. So if you don't have one of these feet for the machine, it's well worth purchasing one, because it makes your job so easy. So pop that on. Our feed dogs are staying up. We're just going to do normal sewing. So this is nothing difficult. Anybody can quilt like this. You may need to put your stitch length up a bit higher. I'm going to go up to about 2.8. Now what we're going to do when we quilt this block, and this is what I like to do when I'm quilting the block, I like to work out a map of where I'm going to stitch. I'm going to just put this back over down here so you can see it. Now if I start quilting here, I'll be able to quilt all the way down here in the ditch till I get to this point here. I'll be able to stitch across here till I get to this point. I'll be able to stitch across here till I get to this point. I'll then be able to come across to this point, across the diagonal again, and then I can come back and I can come right back where I started from. So that eliminates me stopping and starting everywhere. But when I quilt from here to here, I'm going to have to start here and stop here, because there's no real road map that I can get around all of that without backtracking over something. So that's how I'm going to quilt this block, and I'm going to show you how to start and stop and do all of those things. But when we start right at the edge here, we don't have to do anything except start sewing. So we're going to stitch right in the ditch, which is right in that seam. And The reason that I would strongly recommend, if you're a beginner quilter, the clear thread is brilliant to use, because if I run off out of this ditch, and you know the ditch is the area where you don't have that fold, where your seam is pressed away from this piece here is where the ditch is, because my seam is pressed back this way. Now if I ran out of one of these ditches using this thread that I've got on, this white thread, you'd be able to see it. But if I ran out of the ditch with the clear thread on, you're not going to see it. Now if I was using a different batting under here, I would definitely have to have a walking foot on, because my 3 layers would be moving. But having this fabric that is ironed down and the adhesive has adhered to the 2 layers, I get no puckering, no pulling. So now I'm to the tip of this point, my needle's down, I'll lift the pressure foot up and I'll stitch across here. So you can see I still have the awl in my hand so that it helps me guide things along. Get to the point, stop at the point, lift your pressure foot up. So you can see this is just regular for anybody that's never quilted before. This is just regular sewing, but you've got 3 layers together. You know, you can zoom through here pretty fast once you get going with it. So we'll come over to this side here. Stop at the point, lift your pressure foot and go. So we'll get to the point again. So we'll just keep coming around, and I'll just scoot through here fast now so that we can get to doing the rectangles. Stop at that point. You know, anybody can enjoy quilting like this. And imagine if I had this all pinned, I'd be stopping all the time and taking pins out. I'm just about there. Over to the final point, stop, and you can see having your needle down in your work really helps, keeps you on track. So we're back now to where we started, so you can see how quick that is to quilt up a block like that. Now we'll cut our thread, oops, cut the thread. Now I'm going to turn it over so you can have a close look at the back. And you know, the backing I've used is rather nice because the white thread buries into it. But if I had like a greeny coloured fabric on the back and I didn't have my thread matching properly, you would see all the quilting. And we'll talk more about the invisible thread when we get to our applique, and you'll see how important it is to us. But let's go back to the front, and I'm just going to start here, and I'm going to show you how I start, and then when we get to here I'll show you how to finish, so that you know how to start and finish at all of those points, because a lot of our blocks will have to start and stop a lot. So put your pressure foot down, have your top thread in your hand. Now if you've got a needle up, needle down position, you would press that button and it will take your needle down, press it again, your needle will pop up, and as it pops up you'll pull your top thread and it'll pull your bobbin thread up. But I'm just going to hand do it. I'm going to hand wind my needle down, want it to be right on that edge, hand wind the needle down, keep winding till it starts coming up, and as it comes up I'm going to pull on the top thread and my bobbin thread pops up to the top. So I'm going to pull that top thread through now. So now I've got both threads at the top and I'm not going to get a knot or a mess underneath. Then I'll just do a couple of stitches. I'll just hold my fabric, so I'm going to do a couple of stitches on the spot. Okay, you can press the reverse button, but I don't. I just hold it so the machine does a couple of stitches and then I start. I'll come across to the other side. When I get to the other side, I'm just going to start reducing my stitch length down, so I'm on 0 when I get there. And that's all I do to start and stop. But you don't want to start decreasing your stitch length down too far back, because you'll see it. Just in the last couple of stitches, go from, like I was on 2.8 and I wound my knob back fairly quickly, so I did 2 stitches and I was on 0, then I did a couple of stitches on 0, and pull away and cut your thread top and bottom. And then you don't see where I've started and stopped. I've got no knots, I've got everything just sitting there, and it just lays in there beautiful. So you just keep going and doing all of those. Now if you want to do a little bit more with your stitching, let's come back and do a little bit of outline stitching. So we're going to do a 1/4 inch out from the side, or you may not want to do a 1/4 inch, you might want to be a little bit closer in. So this is where you would need to move your needle position. So I've got a button on my machine, which most machines have. You can adjust your width of your needle positioning by touching your zigzag button width. So we're just going to move this needle over a bit. I'm going to use the side of my foot against that ditch, and I'm just going to stitch around all the outer part of this. Oops, I better turn my stitch length back up. That would be a little bit helpful. So just keep the edge of your foot right against the edge of that fabric. So right out to the edge. Move over so the edge of the fabric's right on the edge there. Stop the same distance from this piece here. Pivot. Your foot's still right up against. And this is what we call echo quilting. We're just going to echo the shape all the way around. So just keep going right through and doing this, and it really adds a lot of interest to your blocks. Let me just pull this up so you can see. It adds a lot of interest to your blocks without doing a lot of hard work. You might like to come into the middle and you might like to do a 1/4 inch around here. You might like to stitch in around here. Just experiment and see what you can come up with. You can make it as simple or as intricate as you want. But that's just a little bit about quilting with your feed dogs up and an open toe foot. No safety pins, no movement, no walking foot. It just makes it very, very easy. And I credit it all to this batting, to the Hobbs Heirloom double-sided fusible batting. And you'll see later on as we start to join these blocks together that you're not going to have any bulk. And you've done such a great job if you've followed all of my instructions, because you'll have those 1/4 inch points that's going to make joining this quilt together so, so easy. So now we're going to show you, the next step we're going to show you is how we're going to quilt our applique blocks before we do the applique. So we're going to do a bit of free motion quilting. So join into that one. Now we're going to talk about free motion quilting. These are the blocks that I've got ready to do my appliques on. And the first thing we're going to do before we applique is we're going to quilt the blocks, which makes it so much easier. Because if we had applique shapes on here, we'd be trying to quilt in and around all the shapes, which can be a bit of a challenge for a lot of people. So no matter what level you're at with quilting, I'll just show you a few hints and tips. I've got my background squares cut out, and here we've got a couple of pieces of batting. And I just want to show you what you will do if you have to start joining your batting pieces together, that you don't have enough to cut a full square out of. First of all, you'll cut your backing fabric. So we've got that all cut here ready. We're going to put our 2 pieces of batting on here, have them hanging over a little bit. Line this edge up against this edge, and you're just going to butt them together. You don't have to overlap them, they're just going to sit right up against each other. Then we'll put our fabric on top. Then we're going to press this with a hot dry iron. So we don't need steam, we'll just use a little iron. Now as I iron over where those 2 pieces are joined, or as I press I should say, I don't iron this batting, I press it. But as I press this down, those 2 edges are adhering together. So they're not going to split apart. I don't need to stitch them, I don't need to use the strips to join your batting together. You just iron it and it melds together. So slowly press over this whole piece of fabric, then you'll flip it over and you'll press the back. But remember, a slow iron is what you need, because you need to get plenty of heat in for that fusible to be activated so it sticks to the fabric. And remember, when you wash your quilt for the first time, all this fusing in this batting washes out, so there's never any stiffness left in your quilt, which is just beautiful. They're all soft and cuddly. So just keep moving the iron across it, and it's so wonderful just to be able to iron up your blocks and quilt, and you haven't got all those pins in the road. So there we go, we've got the 3 layers now joined together. So now, if you're a person that can't free motion quilt, why not quilt a grid? Why not draw diagonal grid on here, say 1 inch apart? But if I have to draw on a fabric like this, I definitely don't want to use a fabric marking pencil, because I'd have to wash the lines out when I finish. So I do all my marking on something like this with the Hera marker. This is a lovely little tool, and it actually puts a crease in your fabric. We have them on our website. But if I'm going to be drawing this line across here, I'll turn it around so the ruler doesn't get the reflection on it. All we do is push alongside the ruler with the Hera marker, and we get a crease in our fabric. So now I've got a line that I can stitch on. I can have my feed dogs up, my open toe foot on, and I can stitch on these lines. Let's do another couple of lines. So you just keep marking up your work until you get it done and fill up the whole piece, and then you just quilt on those lines. You could draw a line going in another direction. So you can just mark up your fabrics to the way you want. If you didn't want to do straight lines, there's no reason why you can't do curved lines, and then you stitch on that line. And that can make it look really interesting to do all different sorts of lines like this on your quilts. It just gives the whole quilt movement. So don't be afraid to experiment. And the good thing about doing a quilt like what we've done different quilting in all the blocks. Every block does not have to be the same. When we go to our sewing machine, if I was quilting on these lines, I could have feed dogs up and the open toe foot on. And I've got the sew slip mat on here, so the fabric's just going to slide through. But I want to talk about free motion quilting. So I'm going to change the foot. I'm going to take this open toe regular foot off my machine, and I'm going to now replace it with the open toe free motion foot. Now you can see this foot here, it's like a C. This fits my Bernina, but if I was using a different brand machine, my foot would look different. So all you need to do, if you don't know what the foot is you should be using, refer to your machine manual or go and contact your machine dealer. Tell them you want an open toe foot for free motion quilting. A lot of machines come with a foot for free motion quilting, but they'll be a complete circle or a complete oval, which I find if I'm wanting to quilt on a line, like I just drew before, if this is completely closed, I can't see the line. So that's why I like an open toe free motion foot. So we'll pop this on the machine. However it goes on your machine, they all attach differently. So we'll pop that on. Now the next thing we do is these feed dogs that feed our fabric through, and if you don't know, those teeth are called feed dogs. That's what moves your fabric through. But when we free motion quilt, we need to drop those feed dogs, because if we have the feed dogs up, we haven't got the freedom to move the fabric to get all nice designs. So we're going to drop the feed dogs. Now all machines have a button in a different place to drop the feed dogs. Mine is around the side of the machine here. I just press the little button in and my feed dogs disappear. You may, on your machine, it may be inside the bobbin area, it may be at the front of your machine underneath here, it may be up the top here. All the machines are different, you just need to refer to your manual to find where yours is. So now that those feed dogs are dropped, I can now move the fabric in any direction under the needle and curl it around wherever I want to go. The minute those feed dogs are dropped, our machine now makes no stitches. So it's up to me to move the fabric in under the needle. If I move my fabric really slow and have my foot on the foot pedal really hard, my needle will be going up and down really fast. So if I've got fast needle and slow fabric, I get very, very small stitches. If I have slow needle and very fast fabric, I get very big stitches. So this is where the challenge is in learning to free motion quilt. You need to learn to move your fabric and needle in the rhythm that you need to be able to do to create the even stitches. But let's grab this piece of fabric, and you can see I've drawn those curved lines. I can stitch these free motion, which is very, very easy to do, so long as I keep fabric and needle going at a nice pace so I get the stitches even. So you can leave your machine stitch length on whatever it's on, but remember that's not going to make that stitch. I usually drop my stitch length back to 0. Not that that's going to do anything, it just helps save the jeopardy of my machine. So we're just going to come down. Now if you're quilting at this speed, make sure your fabric's moving at a good speed. Stop whenever you want with your needle in the down position. If you don't have a machine where your needle stays down, if you want to take your hands off and your needle is up, the fabric will probably jump to the side. So always have needle in down position. I'm just going to hand wind the needle down so you could see what you'd do if you didn't have a needle down position. Just continue on stitching on that curve. And it can look really effective to do stitching like this on your blocks. There's no rule to what quilting design you put on. I can now go backwards up, and what I'm doing is I'm keeping this edge of this foot, I'm keeping it running parallel with that first row of stitching I did, but I'm over a little bit out from it. But I'm not watching the needle, I'm watching the side of that line. But see how I can pull my fabric towards myself when I'm actually stitching backwards? And that's the nice thing about learning to free motion quilt, and these blocks are perfect to practice on. So there I've got 2 rows of stitching. Makes it very easy. So we can do any stitching, any pattern we want. If you're not good at drawing a design on here free motion, which I mean is you just stitch it. Like I'm going to stitch one now, I'm going to stitch a flower. So I can do a little petal, another petal, another petal, and another petal. Can go into the centre and loop a loop, come out. Then I could start and do another flower attaching it on. But you might not be able to do that. So if you want to, let's say you want to stitch feathers on here, you want to do really lovely feathers on your applique blocks. Get yourself a nice feather stencil, which you can buy at all different quilt shops. Get a good fabric marking pencil like the bowhin pencil that I talked about in the beginning of this video. Trace the design onto here. Do it free motion. Stitch on the line. It makes it very, very easy. You might want to just stipple your blocks where you just curve in and out. Stippling can be quite hard if you've not practiced it before, because it's all about getting your curves all even and neat. But if you don't want to do that, you might be able to do like little teardrops. Do a little teardrop and then echo that teardrop. Do another teardrop and echo it. I'm going to echo again. And echo just means that you're going around that shape again. Do another one. And I love this pattern because it fills in really easy for you. Do another one out here. Do another one. And you just keep moving around, up and down, and you fill in the space. So it doesn't matter how you quilt your blocks, but I would suggest have fun, practice, do a little bit of different quilting on each block, and it'll look fabulous. You'll do a really, really great job of it. So that's just the basics to how we can quilt our blocks before we do the applique. So next we're going to show you how to use the applique templates, how to cut out your shapes, how to put them in place, and how to stitch around them. Now we're up to starting to do our applique. So this little session is, I'll just talk briefly about how we use our templates that come in your pack. You've got all the different applique sets here. You've got a little pattern sheet so you know what goes where. You've got this layout sheet in the pattern so you can see exactly where we put them. But just because we've put them in these positions on our quilts doesn't mean to say you have to have yours in that position. Obviously the centre one, you've got that big long panel there, that'll have to stay there. But you can switch your applique shapes around. You might not want to do all of these appliques. You might want to just use that one and repeat it 4 more times. That's purely up to you. You make this quilt yours. You take ownership of it. You do not have to copy it exactly as we have. So we've quilted our blocks. And I just wanted to show you this one because I'm going to take it in really close to the camera because we use the monopoly clear thread in the bobbin. Now we've used it in the bobbin here because when we do our stitching of our applique, if I used a regular thread on the bobbin, I would see the blanket stitch coming through to the back, which does not look nice because a blanket stitch on the wrong side is like a zigzag. It doesn't look good. So if you do your quilting with the monopoly in the bobbin, all your stitching will blend in together. We had the monopoly in the top when we quilted this block and it just blends in. It looks like a white thread, but it's not. It's an invisible thread. So you can set your machine up with that after you finish piecing your blocks, do all your quilting with it, and then come back and do the applique. It's really, really easy. Now we need to choose what fabrics we're going to use. I've got a few different ones here that I'm going to use to demonstrate with. We're going to use this template set, so you get all of these in the pack. So we're going to use all of these different shapes. And I've got a fair bit of it cut out, but I'm just going to demonstrate how I would cut out. I'd use the sandpaper part of my workboard, and this time I'm working off the small workboard just so that those that may be a little bit interested in the smaller workboard, you can see how it works. I want to do a small circle, so I'm going to go to the wrong side of the fabric. I've got it on the sandpaper. Now a little thing about our templates, and you may get a little bit curious about this, but these aren't perfect circles. All of these shapes aren't perfect and symmetrical. We wanted to give it a little bit of a naive, funky sort of look, so we didn't concentrate on getting all of these shapes exactly the same when we drew them out and when we designed this quilt up. We just wanted them all to be a bit odd in shape, so don't expect this to come out a perfect circle. It's definitely not. Put your circle down on your fabric, hold it well, use your bowhin marking pencil. I've got the black lead. Now the reason I'm using my sandpaper, when I trace around here, I'm not getting any stretching out of the fabric at all. If I just had this fabric on the tabletop, when I drew around there, my fabric would all move and I'd lose the shape. So there's our shape. Now you could cut this out with scissors, quite easy, but I do most of my cutting of my appliques with the little rotary cutter. It's really, really easy because you can see everywhere where that blade's cutting. So just cut around, and I just find it's very quick and very easy to do this. But if you choose to cut out with your scissors, that's perfectly fine. Just have a nice, really sharp pair of scissors, because you don't want to get any frayed edges. You want it to be a nice, clean cut. So go through and trace all your applique shapes, cut them all out, and then you're ready to position it onto your background fabric. And as you note here, we haven't yet trimmed the block back. We don't do that till we get the appliquing done, just in case it pulls in a little bit more. So we'll just build our design up. Make sure you've got plenty of room left at the sides, because remember, we're going to trim it. Just position your shapes till you're happy. They don't have to look exactly as ours do. Get it, you know, use your imagination, change things around a bit. Just pull this up a bit. I'm going to put another circle on there, but I've cut 2 circles the same size. I don't like them both being that size, so I'm just going to cut one back a bit smaller. So you could, this makes it very easy to use this part of the template. I'll just trim this, go and retrace the smaller shape, just to show you how easy it is to use that inner part of that template, because it sits there much easier for you than just using this little circle to trace around. So we'll cut that out, then we will position it all where we need it to be. So you can see how handy the little workboard is. Now as I cut around here, I'm just going to pivot this fabric till I get the whole circle cut. So there's my little circle cut. You know, like you could experiment here. I could put that over the top of that, do something a little bit funky. So I've got that flower showing through. So you can play around with different things and experiment till you get a look that you like. But let's turn this flower around and let's put this here. So you can just build up your design to however you like it. And when you get it how you think you're going to like to have it on your block, just want to reposition this down a bit. And you notice that I haven't put any fusible web underneath this. I'm not using that product because I just want this to be nice and soft. I don't want to add stiffness that the fusible webs would add to my quilting. I'm going to use the Roxanne glue basted. Take the top off. Now all I'm going to do is turn these pieces back and put a little, oops, too much glue, just a little bit of glue under each one of these pieces around the edge. Put some across here. Now this glue will wash out. When we wash our quilt for the first time, when it's completed, this glue will all wash out, so there'll be no stickiness or stiffness left there. It's not going to pick up on our needle. If you're a person that would like to blanket stitch this down by hand, the glue will not pick up onto your needle, and it won't pick up onto your machine needle. It's a lovely product to use. I use it all the time. I glue my bindings down before I stitch them on. Whether I'm hand stitching or machine stitching the bindings down, they all get glued down before they get stitched. I just find it holds things much better than what pins ever will. Just going to turn this around, position it to wherever I want it to sit. Then we'll put the little one over the top. Just a little bit more glue there. So there's my applique shape all in place. Now if I decide, I didn't really like those two colours together, and you want to take any of this off, you can just pull it off. But when you're ready, before you stitch, you could wait a half an hour for this glue to dry naturally, but if you're ready to go to the machine and start stitching now, just set it with a hot iron. And then all of that will be set in place while you go and stitch. Now that's just puckered up a bit, so I can lift it up and reposition. So you've got a lot of flexibility using the glue. It's really, really lovely to use. Now that won't move anywhere while we do the stitching. Now your stitching, I'm going to leave it totally up to you. You could do a raw edge, like you could have the open toe free motion foot on your machine like we had on for the free motion quilting. You could just, and have the mono poly thread on the top and the bobbin, you could just stitch right on the edge. Call it sketchy applique. Go around it a couple of times with a straight stitch and just form the stitching line around on the edge on each of those pieces. You might want to hand stitch it on with blanket stitch, but if I was going to blanket stitch this down by hand with a lovely embroidery thread, I wouldn't take my needle and thread right through to the back. I just go through the top layer of fabric into the batting and come back up and do my blanket stitch. You might like to do a fine zigzag. But what we've done, and I'll get the camera to come down as close as it can onto this block, we've used a blanket stitch on our machine, or a buttonhole stitch. We closed the length and the width right up, and we had a lovely variegated thread. These are the superior variegated threads. We had this in the top of the machine, and we had the mono poly thread in the bobbin. So I'm going to leave it up to you to what stitch you're going to use to put your appliques down. There's so many different options, and I'd just love to see what you're going to be doing. This is just a triple stitch that we've used here and gone over it a couple of times, just a stitch on our machine, and just used a variegated thread to do that. So there's lots of beautiful threads out there. Go to your little local quilt store, have a look at all the beautiful threads, choose what you think is going to suit your blocks and stitch it down. Here we've used a tealy coloured variegated thread. Once again, we've used the lovely little blanket stitch that I have on my Bernina machine. But do a bit of an experiment on a scrap of fabric and see which threads and which stitch you would like to use best. Have all your piece blocks made. Have them all quilted like we showed you earlier on. Do all your appliques. Now when you do your bias for your appliques, I want you to have a look at my YouTube video on how I make bias, because there's a great lesson there, and I can show you much more on that lesson than what I could show you here, because you need to cut a bit of bias for here. But that video will show. Okay, so now we've got all of our blocks complete, and I just want to show you this block very, very closely. So we'll take it into the camera. We've done a blanket stitch or a buttonhole stitch on the machine, and we've used a beautiful variegated thread, which I love to use those. But around this row here, we did some sketchy applique or raw edge stitching. We just did this free motion. The feed dogs were down, the free motion foot was on, and we just drove those stitches around the edge of that shape. But if you don't want to do it free motion, put your feed dogs up, put your open toe foot on, and just do a couple of rows of straight stitching around that shape. So make your choice of how you want to stitch around these applique shapes. Experiment, do different things on them. They don't all have to be exactly the same. That's what makes the quilts very interesting, and that's what helps you learn different things. So now we've got this block made and quilted. We've got our piece blocks made and quilted. So as we did, we stitched in the ditch, and then we just came and echoed it around 1/4 of an inch out from the shape. So they're all done, quilted right through to the back. So we're going to show you how we trim these back, but before I do that, I just want to come to the quilt on the back wall. Because the measurement that you trim back to, we do tell you in the pattern what to trim back to, but that's working from our quilt. So if you've adjusted sizes or done something different, or yours hasn't pulled in as much when you've quilted it because you haven't done as much quilting as we have, your sizes may differ. So you'll have to do a little bit of maths. But it all is featured around this centre block. So when we trim this one, these have to be made so that they fit the length of this block. So just take your time, do a little bit of calculation here, just so you can get it right. But we are going to join the blocks together with a sashing between them. So you have to calculate that into it too, and I'm going to show you how to make the sashings and how to join it in. But you may prefer to change this and make it wider. You may prefer to have it narrower. That is purely your choice. So you'll just need to do a little bit of math. But in here we've got all the different things that you need to do to help you get this together beautifully. So we go step by step. So if you don't understand it, read your notes because it's all in there. Now I'm going to trim this block back first because we've got 1/4 inch points on here, and using the templates it has allowed us to get that perfect 1/4 inch point. When we trim this back we must still have this 1/4 inch, because when we join this together we're going to stitch right into that point. So we're just going to use our little ruler again. We don't need the long ruler. We're going to put the 1/4 inch lines on the ruler right onto the point, and anything that hangs outside that, because the fabric could have stretched a little bit when we quilted it. So I've got the 1/4 inch line right on the tip of the point here and here. It's even on the fabric here, but I've got a little bit of fabric hanging over at this end, and that means it's just stretched a little bit. So we're going to trim that off, and I do need to use the bigger cutter to do this. Close your blade up, turn around, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch. Now I've got this line on the ruler laying on this edge. I can still see I'm in a 1/4 inch here, so this is running parallel along here. I've got my 1/4 inches sitting right on the point, and we'll trim. And it's just worth taking your time doing this. So this line along the ruler is going to sit on this edge. I'm right on my 1/4 inch. Got my 1/4 inch here, and trim. So it's very easy to do, and it really does tidy up your blocks very nicely. But just always expect that these blocks may have looked perfect before you started quilting them, but some fabrics will stretch further as you've got them under that machine and doing the quilting. If you happen to put your ruler down, and from the tip of your point out, and if it came out onto the wadding a little bit and you didn't have the top fabric all coming out to the 1/4 inch, that's okay. Still trim so that that's on your 1/4 inch there, and you get a 1/4 inch. If you've got a little bit of wadding sitting out here on the side to give you your exact 1/4 inch, that doesn't matter, so long as you have a 1/4 inch from your point out to wherever you cut, because that'll all be calculated in the seam later on. You won't see that you haven't had this underneath fabric right out to the edge. So there's our first block, and I don't know whether you can see this. You can see I've got a little bit of wadding or batting sticking out here. My fabric's back here, but my batting's out to here. That's because this bit of fabric has shrunk back in. But still, from that tip of the point out all the way through, I've got my exact 1/4 inch point. So the block's nice and neat, the back's neat, the front's neat. So now we'll measure this up, and we have 9.5 inches, 9.5 inches, 9.5 inches. So we'll trim this one back to be 9.5 inches. So I'm going to trim one side first. Trim that. Now I want to have this so the ruler's at 9.5. We'll trim. We'll come back this way, 9.5. So I've got the 9.5 inch line here. Just need to check it this way. Oops, turn my ruler around. 9.5. So I've got the 9.5 inch measurement over here, and I'm going to trim up this way. Come up, move your ruler, trim. We'll do the same this way. So you can see, just using one little ruler, I don't have all different size rulers everywhere. I've just worked with the one. I just find it very easy to do, and I'm just keeping my eye on this 9.5 inches here, and there I have my applique block all trimmed up. So now our blocks are ready to join together. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to join them together with the same size sashing as we've got on the quilt behind us. But this is where you make the decision. How far do you want to split these blocks aside? How wide do you want this sashing to be? That's purely your choice. We're going to put, cut a piece of our backing fabric. This is our backing fabric, what we've used on the back of the blocks. We've cut this one 2 inches wide. So what we're going to do now is cut this 2 inches wide by the length of our block, by the 9.5 inches. We're going to pin this so the backing pieces go right sides together. So I'm putting this piece down right sides together. I'm going to use my flower head pins. And I'm going to pin from this side. I want to pin from the front. Just going to leave a little bit hanging over here, because it's not, this strip here underneath is not quite straight, so I'm going to leave it hang over a bit. Pop some pins along there. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew this on, and we're going to sew so we get right to that point. So we're going to use the 1/4 inch seam. Once we sew down this side, we're then going to come back and sew this block onto the other side. So we're going to put this, we call this a spacer strip. It's going to go in between the two blocks. So when we come back up to the quilt, back up here, between these blocks here, underneath here is this spacer strip. This grey strip I'm putting on now is underneath that white strip. So it's like a back sashing. We do call it a spacer strip. So we're going to sew that on now, and then we'll make a sashing up and put over the top, and then you just continue repeating that process till you get the whole. So we've now got the spacer strips stitched between the blocks, so the wrong side's facing up. We've used the 1/4 inch seam, and you can see we've kept our points perfect. We haven't lost our 1/4 inch points, and this is the good thing about our Quilt As You Go technique. It will look like a normal quilt when it's finished. Have a look at the back. You can see that it sits in there nicely. But as I said at the beginning, if you want to put different fabrics on the back of each block and you want to do your spacer strips as different coloured fabrics, this could be a completely reversible quilt, and it'll still look really neat and beautiful. But now we've done that, we're going to now make our sashings. Now to make our sashings, we can choose from any of our sashing tools. And the reason these are called sashes, a lot of people ask me, you know, did you have a daughter sash, or is that what you've named them after? No, it's because I designed these specifically to start with to do sashings for our Quilt As You Go quilts. Because, you know, we're just going to put a regular sashing over here today, a straight strip of fabric. But you can get really, really creative with your sashings. And I'd love you to watch all the other videos that we've got on our YouTube channel, because you will see lots of different sashings that we've added to different quilts. So experiment. You don't have to do them plain like we're going to do them now. But I just want to start you off with the basics, and then you can learn through the other videos all the other things you can do. So now, this was a strip that was cut 2 inches wide to start with. We've taken a 1/4 inch seam. So now from seam line to seam line, it now measures 1.5 inches. I need to now use the 1.5 inch sasher tool. Whatever you decide to measurement you decide to make your spacer strip, that will determine what size your sasher needs to be. Whatever the measurement is written at the top of the tool, your fabric needs to be cut double that measurement. This is the finished size. So the finished size is the width of this split. So that split measures 1.5 inches. But I need a 3 inch wide strip of fabric to go through there. So we have our 3 inch strip cut. Now, if we were going to be doing one of our long sashings going down the quilt or across the quilt, you know, if we had to do a big long sashing and we didn't have enough fabric length to cut that, we would join, but we'd join it on a diagonal. So we wouldn't do a straight join. we would put that diagonal seam in it, and that's just a little tip for you for later on if you do another quilt. So a 3-inch wide strip of fabric is going to fold in on each side till it meets in the middle. Just pop that down. We'll now press about the first inch or so. We need to get that press because we need it to be the exact measurement of the tool that we're going to put it into. So we come up from the bottom, we go over that centre bar and back down, and we'll pull it through. So there's our fabric now into the sasher tool. So this is a little handle. It doesn't matter what side's up or down, there's no difference. Now the curve in the sasher, I designed that curve to fit the side of any iron. We're going to pin this into the ironing surface. Just pop a pin in here. And this is where I use the double fork pin again. Because if I pin this with two separate pins, because I pin them separately, as I start to iron, one side of your fabric can stretch more than the other and it'll all twist. And you don't want that happening for your sashing. You want it nice and neat. So pin in, and it's going to grab each side of the strip together. So we're getting equal tension on both sides of the fabric. Just bury the pin so that the iron won't get caught on it. We'll just turn this on an angle so you can see it better. Cup up the sides, put the iron against it, and you'll just push with the iron. And it makes making your sashing go so slick and quick, neat and easy. It can't get any easier than that. Take your pin out after you've ironed about 12 inches. Pop the pin back in. Now I just want to come across this seam so that you know how to go across there with the tool. Cup up the sides, keep the iron close to it. When we start to get close to this seam, we're going to start tapping with the iron. Just give it a little bit of a hand to go over that seam, and it just folds it back perfectly. It won't distort whatsoever. So keep ironing it till you get as much done as you need. You know, if you only want to do short strips, do short strips. But I'll just cut this off here. So now, we don't leave it like this. What we need to do now is we need to cut a piece of our batting, the batting that we've used in our blocks, the Hobbs heirloom batting. We're going to cut it so it's just a bit narrower than what this strip is. So this is 2 inches, so I recommend you cut your batting 1 7/8. So we'll just get a strip of batting. We'll open this out, and the tool gives you a lovely crease. You won't lose that crease line. So pop this batting inside. And we're going to fold this back over on both sides, and we're going to press. Now, having this fusible batting, it's going to grab there beautifully for us. We won't lose the crease. It's just going to sit in there beautifully. So we'll go all the way along and keep getting that in there. If I was using another batting, it would cause me a lot more problems. I would, I don't know, I'd have to pin it in. It would become quite bulky. I'd have to use a walking foot to stitch my sashing on with, where I'm going to be able to stitch this on with my open toe foot because I'm not going to get any movement. So I'm pressing the right side now, and there's our sashing made. So very easy to do, very, very easy. We'll come back to our blocks. Now I would cut this to the right length. I'll just get rid of this end. So we want it to fit this block. And to put this in place, we'll use our Roxanne glue basted that we use for our applique. So all the tools that I've recommended to you, you'll use in all your quilts. You don't need a lot of tools, but once you get a good basic set of tools, you know, and contact us because we can put a pack together for you. Just little dots of glue right on the stitching line. You don't need a lot. Now, a lot of people say to me, why did I not put the batting in this spacer strip. The reason being, if I put the batting in there and not in the sashing, when I put the sashing over the top, the batting would suck the sashing down. Regardless of what batting you would use, you'd end up with a dip here, and you don't want to do that. You want to have it nice and full. You want to make it look like a regular sashing that you've stitched either side and it's pushed it up. So we've got our glue down here. Right, the folded edge is going to go right on the stitching line. Now we need to match those points perfect. If the glue spills out a little bit onto the block, don't worry, because it's going to wash out. We're going to match those points perfectly. Then we're going to press right along the edge with our hot iron. And you can see why I love to use the mini iron. It's so portable and can get in everywhere. Like my big iron is a bit clumsy and I can't see what I'm doing. With the little iron, I can see exactly everything that I'm doing. I'm just pressing down on that stitching line to set that glue. And I've only done one side yet, but you can see how perfect those points are going to come out. Now we'll fold this back. We'll do the other side and we'll repeat the process. Now when we iron this side down, we need to pull this block out a little bit because we don't want this spacer strip to suck back in. So we'll just making sure we're lining up with the line. As we go, we're just going to pull out on this block. You just want to just slightly, ever so slightly cover that stitching line. Just get that set down. You know, and ironing the glue, you're going to be well assured this is not going to move anywhere while you do your stitching. You know, and get it really neat at this stage. You don't want to be having to unpick this. It's just moved off my point there so I can reposition that. So take time at the iron, take time with your gluing because it makes the stitching so much easier if you have it right at this stage. And look how gorgeous that looks. Now you might not want to put the white in here. On the requirements list that we give you with the pattern, it tells you how much to buy for your sashing, which is your background fabric, but you might like to choose a different colour here, and that's perfectly fine. You mightn't want it as light as what we've got it. You know, here we've put a brighter colour in. So work with your fabrics and decide what you want to do. If we go back to the quilt on the back wall, you can see to give it a bit of interest, we've used the green to here and then we've added a white piece in. And then down the bottom, we've done the opposite. So it just gives the quilt a little bit of interest. And it's just to encourage you, you don't have to be basic and plain. You can switch things out. Experiment. It's the best thing you can do with quilting. Get creative. So now we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch right on the edge of this white fabric. So when we stitch, it's just going to sit right on the edge as close as you possibly can. We'll have the monopoly thread in the bobbin and we'll have the monopoly thread in the top of the machine. Because using the monopoly in the bobbin, you don't see all the applique stitch. You won't see where you've stitched your sashing on from the front. If I used a regular thread on my bobbin, I will see all the stitching. So I don't want to see that. So that's why we recommend the monopoly. And remember, please use that one. Don't use a nylon thread because your machine does not like it and it can damage your machine. And a nylon thread will melt. The monopoly thread will not melt when you put the hot iron on it. Like we've quilted it with it in the top and the bobbin. I can sit the hot iron on there for the rest of the day and it will not melt the thread. It'll destroy the fabric, but it won't melt the thread. So that's why we recommend that thread. So let's go to the machine and show you how we top stitch that, and then we'll talk about the conclusion of the quilt. Sashing down, I've still got the sew slip mat on my machine because I want it all to slide through nicely, particularly as we start to join all the rows together. This will help you immensely. It'll be the best investment you make for your machine. It's great. We've got the open toe foot on. We've gone back to that. We've got our feed dogs up. We've got the mono poly thread, the clear thread in the top and the bobbin of the machine. Now we're just going to put our blocks under here. We want this inside edge of the foot to sit right against the edge of that fabric, right on the fold, right in that ditch of where the block and the sashing meet. Now, the other thing we need to do, we want to stitch right on the edge. So I'm going to move my needle position over. So hopefully you've got a button on your machine where you can move the needle. And I'm going to move the needle over so the needle sits right on the edge of the fabric, just inside it. It's gone one step too far. Okay, so as I sew now, I'm going to keep my eye on that edge of that foot. I'm not going to look at the needle, I'm going to look at the side of that foot. And I'm just going to stitch a straight row of stitching all the way through. Just a normal stitch length, and come right down as close as you can on that edge of that fabric. And it's so simple to do a beautiful row of stitching. So I don't know if you can see that, whether the camera can come in a bit closer. And using that batting, you're not getting all of that bulk at the seam that you would with other battings. Now once we've got this stitched on, if you felt so inclined, you could come back and quilt some rows of stitching in here. You could quilt it. You could do some straight rows down through the middle. You could use that Hera marker that I showed you in a previous session. You could put some curves into it. You could do curves one way and then come back the other. You could do some stippling. You could do some nice flowers and pebbles. You could do anything in here, or you could leave it plain. That's entirely up to you. So we'll just scoot down this side. And it's so lovely having a guide that you can follow, so you're not trying to stitch a straight line and keep running off. Now also using that batting and using the glue, no pins are in the road. I get no movement out of my fabric. I don't have to use a walking foot. I'm just going to stitch across here. If I was using another batting, I'd need to use a walking foot, and I'd find it very difficult to get close to the edge of that sashing. So that's why I wanted to recommend all the different things to you, so you could get a really, really neat finish like we do with our quilts. And hopefully we're going to see more and more and more Quilt As You Go quilts come into life, because I just think for those, and it's like myself, I find this so easy to sit at my tiny little Bernina and make a beautiful quilt. I can quilt it myself because all I've got to do is quilt one block at a time. The borders, once you cut your borders out, which are covered in the instruction pack, you will quilt the borders and you will join them to the quilt exactly the same as what we've joined these two blocks together. You will put a spacer strip in here, and then you will join the borders to that spacer strip, and then you'll put a sashing across it just like we have here. And we'll go back to the quilt in a moment, so I'll explain that more to you. But you'll just follow the steps that we've taken you through to get your quilt completely finished with your borders on and your binding, and it's done. You don't have to send it out to be quilted. It's your own work. So there's our sashing stitched on really close to the edge. Really, really close. But you can appreciate how beautiful it would look if I come back now and do some quilting. And when we go back and have a look at our quilt, we'll show you how we've quilted the sashings on that, just to give you some ideas. It's very basic, but you could see that you could do some beautiful intricate quilting in this to really make a feature of that white fabric. But it's really beautiful, isn't it? You can create such wonderful things with colour and fabric. But let's make it easy for you. Let's get you having perfect points. Let's get you quilting your own quilt. And you know, I think learning to quilt on small blocks like this, we can learn a lot faster because we can maneuver it under the needle. We haven't got the bulk intimidating us. We've just got that one piece of fabric. So let's go back and have a look at the quilt and finish off. So now we've got the blocks all done, we've got the sashing on, and now we're ready to talk about your borders, because you know now how to join all of these together. It's exactly as I just showed you. So now with the borders, you can make these whatever width you want. That's entirely up to you. What we've done is we've cut a strip here and another strip, and then we've joined this in between. But if you didn't want to join it in between, this could be like a sashing. You could just put it on as a fake piece, put it through the sasher, and then just stitch that over the top of that. But it's a good way of learning how to do different things. Then we've got the corner blocks. We just put these in to give a bit of interest to the quilt. So I'm just going to explain how to make the corner blocks up and what you do to quilt them, and then we've joined another sashing in here. Then you just join the borders on exactly the same as you've joined the blocks together. You'll put the spacer strip between the blocks and the border. Then you'll make your sashing up, you'll put the batting inside it, you'll glue it on and you'll stitch it. And when it's all completed, all you've got to do is bind the quilt. And if you want to know about binding your quilt, go and look at my binding video where I show you how to use the Duo tool to do your binding. This is a fabulous tool for getting a really, really neat binding on your quilt. And there's a whole video on there of how to do that and how to use this tool. Now, when we make our corner sections, we've got really good instructions here for you, what templates to use. You'll go back and you'll use some of the templates that's in the set. So we tell you to use T3 and T4 and T8. So they're all in the set. So you'll cut out your strips, you'll make each of your units up. So we just start with the squares, we join them together. Then we'll join our little strip onto them. Once we put our 1/4 inch seam there, it'll fit perfectly. Then you're going to join them up with a square on either side. Oops, I'll turn this one around the right way. Then you're going to put, one of these between each of these blocks. We'll have another one in here. I just don't have another one. And then you'll join that together with this strip through there, and that gives you the complete block. So it shows you step by step how to do it. Once you piece that together, you will then quilt, and we talk about how to quilt your borders, how to make your sashings up, how to quilt your little corner blocks, how to make sure it's glued perfectly so those pieces meet perfectly and they look like one whole piece. And we just go through step by step how to get that all completed till you get the whole quilt done. And we really wish you good luck with it, because we know you're going to enjoy it. We have every confidence. We've worked for a long, long time to get all of this perfect for you. We've made many quilts to make sure it's absolutely perfect every step of the way. We'd love you to send us photos as you progress through this, so we can start to share it out and show other people how easy it is to make a beautiful quilt as you go. And I'd like to make Quilt As You Go become really, really popular, to help all of those people that are struggling to do a big quilt through their little machine. It is so easy when you start to do Quilt As You Go. Please have a look at all the other videos, as I keep saying, on the YouTube channel, and they're on our website as well, because you'll be inspired by other quilts that we make. And we'll be doing other packs like this for you, where you're going to get everything in here. You just have to take this to your local quilt shop and say, I want the fabric to make this quilt, and they will help you out. And don't forget, we do have the batting. It's not easy to get, but we always have it in stock on our website. So visit us at www.pqw.com.au. Subscribe to get our newsletter, because I'd love to keep you up to date, because like if we find there's questions come up through making of this quilt, we'll be able to put answers up there for you. Join us on our Facebook page. Share all of our posts. We'd love you to share our posts so we can spread the word of Quilt As You Go. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Press that bell when you go onto the YouTube channel so you personally will get notifications every time we put a new video up for you. So happy quilting. Enjoy making Lulu. You might like to name it after somebody special in your life. We'd love to see photos of those special people and show us what you've named your quilt. So happy stitching, happy quilting, and bye for now.